Hello, my name is Catherine Van Tassel, and I'm the Director of Behavioral Health Consulting here at GBS. I'm excited to share this webinar on balancing life and mental health. Really, the aim of this is to talk about our mental health and what are some easy, quick strategies that we can start incorporating in our daily lives that don't take up a lot of bandwidth, because I know that many of us are busy and we are overscheduled. So I'm hoping throughout this, you'll be able to pick up one, two, maybe three things that you can integrate that won't be an added level of stress. So let's dive in and get started here. So first, I just want to start by asking everyone a few questions. So while we're going throughout this webinar, just consider these things that I'm going to ask you. So the first is, what has your stress level been over the past year? And considering that stress level, does stress have a negative impact on one of the following? So sleep, nutrition, exercise, and time for self-care. And then lastly, would your life be different if you were less stressed? And how? Would that mean that you get more time for sleep or nutrition or exercise? Would it decrease your stress levels? Would decreased stress levels lead to a better outcome in a relationship or with your health? I just want you to consider this, because if you feel like you answered any of these, I have been more stressed than usual, or the stress level I have might not be more, but it's impacting me negatively. I'm really interested, and I have some buy-in to adopting some of these strategies, because these questions made me stop and think, I really haven't been sleeping well, or maybe I'm not nourishing my body in the best way possible. So just consider these as we go. So my background, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I worked in dialysis for years before I decided to go back to school and become a physician assistant. And really, my desire to do that is because I wanted to do something in preventative medicine, because I was sad of seeing people have poor outcomes because they didn't have proper stress management tools, or they had poor lifestyle medicine strategies to be able to prevent disease, like having to be on dialysis. And so I became board certified in lifestyle medicine. Essentially, what that means is there's a lot of behaviors that we do or we don't do in our daily lives that can either prevent disease or promote disease. And the brain is another organ, like our heart and our lungs and our kidneys. And one of the benefits I think that we've seen trending over the past few years is more attention on our brain, that you don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis of major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder, that we don't need to stop and say, hey, I need to pay attention to my brain health. And most certainly, if we do have a diagnosis of anxiety or depression, we need to be paying attention to that too. So I just wanted to paint an overall picture of what it looks like with stress on the body. So as you can imagine, when we're stressed out, it's hard to concentrate. It's hard to learn new things. Our memory becomes impaired. We can be quick to be angry with things that wouldn't usually irritate us. The smallest little thing can sometimes just set us off. And then we have feelings of depression and anxiety, which can manifest in poor sleep, poor or increased appetite, loss of enjoyment in things that we love to do. So I love to trail run. If one day I said, gosh, I don't really want to go out for a trail run, that would definitely be a warning sign for me that something was going on. So whatever you love to do, if you had a loss of wanting to do that, feeling more overwhelmed and anxious, ruminating thoughts. So these thoughts that they won't shut down, which can impact sleep. Those are just some of the ways that our brains can be impacted by stress. But then the rest of our body, that feeling in your stomach when you're anxious. Sometimes we get butterflies in our stomach. Our stomachs really turned off and turned on in terms of digestion, whether we're in a fight or flight state or a rest and digest. When we're in a fight or flight state, there's not a lot of attention our body wants to pay attention to digesting our food because it's in survival mode. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So we can get an upset stomach, get acid reflux, change in our bowels. So either not being able to go to the bathroom or going to the bathroom more frequently. And then immune system, we can weaken our immune system. We can get sick, kind of this like body breaking down feeling, leading to inflammation in our bodies. Our heart rate. Our heart rate increases when we're in times of stress. The load that goes on our heart, we can get an increase in blood pressure. And then reproductive system is most certainly impacted by stress. So for those that want to have families or trying to have a family, it's really important to be able to mediate stress in our lives because we all have stress. And then physiologically, okay, so this is the fight or flight that I was talking about. So when we are in that fight or flight, we got to run from this perceived tiger, which can be many different things that we'll talk about. Our bodies really turn on, hey, we're going to save you. Here are the things that we need to do. Our eyes will dilate so we can see better. Our liver will release glycogen, which is essentially sugar, into our body so our muscles have energy. Our appetite will actually increase. That's why a lot of us will tend to stress eat. About 80% of people will stress eat under times of emotional stress. And that's because our body, again, thinks that we're trying to fight for our lives or fly, fight or flight. And so you need calories to do that. And typically what we crave are high sugar, high caloric items that will give us the energy for this quick burst of movement. Our breath will increase. Again, bowels shut down. Blood vessels, they'll dilate because, again, we're trying to get everything we can to our muscles to be able to move, get out of there. Muscles become tense, heart starts beating faster, our skin can start to chill or sweat. And the saliva, that decreases because, again, saliva has digestive enzymes to help us digest our food. We don't need that if we're running for our lives, and we don't need to be digesting our dinner at that moment. So stress now, though, looks very different than what it did decades ago when we were hunter-gatherers, when really all of these physiological responses were helping us run for our lives. If that was like a predator that was after us, this was very much built for that, right? That fight or flight, whatever we needed to do. But today we're not hunter-gatherers. We live in comfy little homes and have cars we drive around. But that doesn't mean our world isn't full of different stressors. And the list is very, very long. That's everything from health concerns to having constant connection with the world at all times. So we all have these little super computers in our pockets, our phones that have email and text messaging and Slack or Teams, and then social media. There is always either information streaming in our brain, or somebody able to get us, request something from us, ding us, beep us, whatever that looks like. I mean, it is just this kind of constant alarming state. We have never-ending to-do lists. Our relationships, whether that's lack of a good community, or a demanding social community, deadlines, family conflicts. A lot of these things, some of these things can bring joy, but some of them also bring stress, good stress and bad stress. Throughout our conversation today, I'm going to talk about one of the stress hormones. So there are a few stress hormones, but one of them I'm going to talk about is cortisol. So cortisol is released in our body when we are fighting or flighting under times of stress. We also get cortisol if our hormones are working appropriately. We have higher levels of cortisol in the morning, and that should go down throughout the day and be the lowest right before we go to sleep. So it's not that we don't want to have any cortisol in our body. We most certainly do. It's very advantageous, especially if it's highest in the morning. However, it gets to be disruptive to us mentally and physically if it remains elevated throughout the day. So again, if we're not managing all of these things that are pulling and dinging and asking of us and maybe causing stress, then that's when we get increased levels of cortisol and it starts impacting us. Everything from what I showed you a few screens back in terms of our health, that our immune system, our heart, and our mental health. So that really is the highlight today, right, is our mental health. But there's most certainly this mind-body connection that we don't want to ignore. So we've all heard the term burnout before. This is kind of like, I think there are a few trendy words these days, like mindfulness, which we'll actually talk about, burnout. And this is what happens when we're not mindful. So there's a buzzword, mindful, and mitigate stress. Also, our mindset around stress. What are our thoughts surrounding stress? Like the thought of even a little bit of stress, does that send us off the edge? Or we're thinking, hey, bring it on, I can take it all. But when we're not managing appropriate levels of stress, everything becomes pretty much intolerable. This is when something small happens that wouldn't normally upset you, and then we just completely have a breakdown. And if we get to this point, this can take months to repair. So this is really important that we are paying attention to this. Okay. So first, I just wanted to start with mindset. I love mindset work. Probably my background being in therapy, because our mind is so powerful. And I think it's really interesting, some of the research that has been done around our thoughts on stress. Now, remember, I said it's good to have some stress, but we need to know, okay, how much is too stress? What is our view on stress? And also types of stress. So some types of stress that are really great for our bodies are things like exercise. Exercise increases cortisol in our body, but exercise is fantastic for us for many different reasons. When we have hot and cold exposure, when we fast, these are things that we can induce stress that's really good for our bodies. Now, when we think about our mindset around stress, this is very interesting too. So researchers took 30,000 Americans and they followed them for 8 years. So the reason I point that out is because when you look at studies that are better, meaning that the evidence is better for that study, is when you have a large group of people and it goes for a considerable amount of time. That's because we have a better look into what's really happening versus if you have 10 people who were followed for a couple of weeks. So this is a big group of people over a significant amount of time. And the researchers asked them, do you believe stress is harmful to your health? And then they observed them and watched who died. And what they found is those who believed stress was bad for them had a 43% increased risk of death from all-cause mortality. So essentially everything could be more deadly to them if they thought stress was bad. And those who had significant amounts of stress but did not believe it to be bad had the same risk of death as those with little stress. So interesting. Okay. So if we look at this research, and this is true, after 8 years of tracking deaths, that ended up being 182,000 premature deaths from the belief stress is bad for you. So it averages out being about 20,000 deaths a year. So that would end up being the 15th leading cause of death, killing more people than AIDS, HIV, homicide, and skin cancer. That's not insignificant. This had researchers thinking even more. And so Harvard decided to do some further research on this. Okay, and what they did is they had people come into their labs. So I want you to imagine coming into a lab and having a panel of people in front of you, and your assignment is to give a 5-minute talk on your personal weaknesses. Well, if you're anything like me, I don't want to talk about my personal weaknesses. I most certainly don't want to come up with a 5-minute talk, and I don't want to do it in front of strangers. But to up the ante, they put these bright lights on them, put a camera in front of them, and then the evaluators, no matter what they said, would just give negative feedback. So kind of like they were really bored or frustrated with what the person was saying, would shake their head, roll their eyes, maybe like look around, just like, when is this going to end? So if the 5-minute talk about your own personal weaknesses is not bad enough, now your new assignment is a math test where you count backwards from 996 in increments of 7. Again, with all of this negative feedback, where you get the sighs, the grunts, the shaking of the head, even interruptions of saying, no, that's not right, or faster, you're going too slow. How well do you think you would do in that situation? Maybe you're really great and thrive under stress, and that would be your perfect setting. But for the majority of us, we wouldn't do very well. I don't imagine I would get very far in that math test at all. And this is, of course, what they saw, right? So heart rates increased, breathing increased, people were sweating, people's GI was all over the place under a lot of showed a lot of physiological stress symptoms. So then what researchers did is they taught all of the participants that a stress response is helpful for the body. So essentially what I was saying is that our bodies were built for this, to run from that tiger or to help us stay alive. So they didn't change anything other than changing the participants' idea of stress and our body's reaction to it. So if you've ever been in a stressful situation and your heart started beating faster, your breath started going faster, it might feed into that getting worse because your anxiety increased, right? So once participants were taught this and they redid the test, their body, the physiological response completely changed. So blood vessels stayed relaxed, like they were in times of joy. They didn't have an increase in their heart rate or in their breath. And that was the only thing that was changed. So why I bring this up is because one of the main things that we can do, or one of the things that we can do in terms of stress, is have this idea of what our body is doing is this strong reactive protective measure. And if we can incorporate the things that we are going to talk about with the mindset of some stress is good, too much stress is bad, and the reactions that my body has are strong, and I'm going to flex this muscle of using pro antidepressive lifestyle strategies, then I'm going to really be protective both mentally and physically for my health. Okay, so let's talk about the good news. What are these strategies I keep promising that we can incorporate? And we're going to go through them. We're going to go through some of these that you see on your screen. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is community. And I really think that this hits a little bit harder and closer to home, having come out of a worldwide pandemic, where for the first time in all of our lives, we were separated from our community, and we all had a lot of insight in what that did to us, how that impacted us emotionally. And having that perspective, and also on the backdrop of how our society here in America has become more and more individualized. And I'll talk about what that means in a second, how that's impacted us emotionally. So it's really interesting because, again, when we think about when we were hunter gatherers and we lived in tribes and we depended on one another for our survival, right? You couldn't do everything for yourself. You couldn't find shelter. You couldn't procreate alone. You couldn't be the hunter and gather all the food and prepare it. I mean, your survival really was dependent on being in a tribe. And we've had all these modern conveniences, which I most certainly don't want to give up. I don't want to give up my house or my car and my cell phone. However, all those modern conveniences have separated us, right? I could be in my house for a considerable amount of time and never have to leave it. I could have food delivered. I could pretty much have anything Amazon has, which is an endless supply of things delivered to my house. And I have heating, I have air conditioning, I have TV, I can pay all my bills online, I have credit cards. I mean, really, I don't have to leave my house for very much if I didn't need to or have to. And so, what we've seen with modern day conveniences that have been invented, that again, it's been more easy to survive on our own. However, we've seen across society that that's impacted our connection with our community. And what adults are telling researchers that are asking these questions is they're increasing more loneliness, feeling like no one really knows them well in their life. So a couple of decades ago, researchers asked people, if you needed somebody in the middle of the night, your kid got sick while you were at work and you couldn't leave, your car broke down and you needed a ride, how many people in your life would you be able to depend on? And the average answer to that was about 2 to 3 people. These are the people who drop everything, come and get you whatever you needed, do whatever you needed. However, they've recently done this research again, and the average answer that Americans have given is 0, which that is a pretty impactful discovery. And there are many reasons why we tend to isolate or feel lonely from our community. And that can be lack of social support and infrequent meaningful connections, or having strained relationships. When our mental and physical health isn't doing well, it's hard to really want to go out and be very social. Or if we just have a lack of balance in the activities that we do. We're not putting our community first because there's too many other things pulling us away from that. Well, why am I saying it's important for us to be connected in community? Well, we know that there are lower levels of anxiety and depression. So this is all about mental health and what we can do. So much that when we just have a short positive connection with our community, so whomever that is that a coworker, is that friends, is that family, is that a child, our blood pressure and heart rate decrease. So remember when I was talking about physiological signs of stress, heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up. Just having a short positive interaction, we get a decrease in those. We have higher self-esteem, more empathy for others, we're actually more trusting and cooperative. Making new connections keeps our brains young and alert. I don't know about everyone else, but definitely one of my aging goals is to have my cognitive abilities with me until the day I take my last breath. And then longevity. So people who are socially active have longer lifespans, not only longer lifespans, but healthier lifespans. And then remember our immune system. So it's like that whole chart I showed you at the beginning, how stress impacts us in a negative way. We see social connection improve each of those. So our immune system is strengthened. Then remember I talked about cortisol, that stress hormone. Well, we have the opposite of the stress hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is essentially, instead of running from that tiger I was talking about in your fight or flight, Oxytocin is all about, hey, let's kick up our feet, let's rest and relax, let's digest all that yummy food. It's essentially lying on the beach, reading the best book, or holding your favorite person's hand. This is the connection. Oxytocin drives us to be with our community and wants us to be supported. So when a woman gives birth, her body is completely doused in oxytocin. So I'm sure if you've given birth or you've talked to somebody who's given birth, you've heard the statement that I think I've heard everyone say, is that I never knew I could love somebody so much. Again, this love hormone. If you have a pet at home and you like the pet, that's the asterisk there, and you look them in the eyes, you actually get a little bit of oxytocin from that. So this is just, it is this bonding hormone that we get from connection. So giving someone you love a hug, holding their hand, feeling supported. And also when we care for others, we get a release of oxytocin. So not something we'll really talk about a lot here, but is the studies that they do on people who volunteer, even those who engage in volunteer activities against their will, or they didn't really want to do it, but they go out and do it anyways, they end up feeling happier. And those who volunteer, again, we see or take care of others, have better longevity outcomes. So again, all of these benefits that you see on this slide, the decrease in anxiety, increased longevity, better brain cognition, the release of oxytocin, that is heart protective, regenerative of heart cells, blood vessels relax. It's this natural anti-inflammatory, and we recover faster from stress. So remember I said busy individuals, I totally understand that. Remember when this said just even brief, short, positive interactions with others, we get a decrease in our heart rate and our blood pressure. So this could be just going out for tea or coffee or ice cream with somebody. This could be going on a walk with a coworker and just having a chat maybe for 5 minutes in between meetings or on a break. This could be going outside and playing with one of your kids. Or how about once a month you have people in your social community come over and everybody brings something to eat and you play games or watch a movie. Again, short, and then we can lengthen that out. Increase your social connection however you can see fit in your day-to-day life. Okay, so let's switch gears to sleep. I really, really love talking about sleep because sleep crosses over in terms of benefits of so many things, but specifically because we're talking about mental health. I think that anyone here that has lost sleep 1 or 2 nights knows how pretty much the wheels fall off if you become sleep deprived. Everything seems to become harder. You're just a little grouchier. Oh man, we just need all the sugary foods to keep us awake. We feel maybe kind of nauseous. We just don't feel well. Sleep is so important. And I'm hoping this will be a really good gift for you, for everyone moving forward in envisioning your sleep on a 24-hour clock. So once I understood this from a neurobiology perspective, this really changed how I looked at my own sleep and how I taught sleep to patients in clinic. So if we imagine preparing for our evening sleep when we first wake up in the morning, there's all of these strategies that we could do to make sure we get the best sleep at night to help us both mentally and physically. And so in the morning when we wake up, there are 3 things that we can do that can ensure that we get a good night's sleep. And the reason why I'm talking about sleep on a 24-hour clock is because we've all probably heard of the statement, or we've all heard of circadian rhythm. So every single one of our cells has a circadian rhythm. Essentially, this is our wake-sleep cycle, and it's really set to the sunrise and sunset. And the more in line we are with that, seems the better the outcomes. And the way that we do this is by what I'm going to talk about. So when we wake up in the morning, if we can get some form of movement, this is going to start with getting that good night's sleep. And the reason for that is because when we move our bodies, so whether that's going for a walk or going to an exercise class, riding our bike, we release serotonin and dopamine in our brain. These are neurotransmitters. Serotonin is modulated by medications like Zoloft, Prozac, Lexapro, so our antidepressant medications. Dopamine is what's involved in our brain that helps us with concentration. Also, this feeling of happiness. When we get too much dopamine, that can have bad outcomes, but having a little bit is good. Dopamine is modulated by medications like Adderall. So I always say when we move our bodies, it's like taking a little bit of dopamine or a little bit of Adderall and a little bit of Lexapro or Zoloft or Prozac. So you get a little bit of antidepressant and concentration. So also remember, we want cortisol to be elevated in the morning. This is like the gas to get up and go. We're ready. Let's go. Let's get moving. So, and then it shuts down melatonin. So cortisol high, we're ready to go. We have a little bit of concentration, a little bit of happiness that's kicking in, and melatonin is low, so we're alert and awake. 2, if we can get 10 minutes on a sunny day or 15 to 20 minutes on a cloudy day of sunlight into our eyes, now please don't look directly at the sun. I mean, we just don't want to wear hats or sunglasses. We can get 10 minutes of natural sunlight into our eyes. This also increases our cortisol, decreases our melatonin, tells our brains, hey, it is morning time. It's time to be up, alert, ready to go for the day. The sun at different stages during the day basically is talking to our brain to tell us how alert and awake we need to be, or if we need to start slowing down, shutting down, we're going to go to bed. So this is why it's so important to have natural light in our eyes during targeted times during the day. Okay, so movement, getting sunlight into our eyes. So if you're able to get some movement outside first thing in the morning, you can do a 2-for-1 there, the movement and getting the sunlight into your eye. The third, and this is the one I get the most pushback on, but hear me out, is to have a 1-minute cold shower. So what happens when we have a 1-minute cold shower is we also release some dopamine. It is a really good tool. And again, alert, awake. It's modulating neurotransmitters in our brain, helping with concentration. So doing these things, either separate or ideally, if you can do all 3 as many days of the week as possible, this starts off our 24-hour clock of getting really good night's sleep that night. Now, as we go throughout the day, the other thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is that you're exposing yourself to lots of bright light. So again, this is telling our brain we're supposed to be awake, we're supposed to be moving, it's a daytime. So if you're in an office, if you have a ring light, or if you can sit next to a window, or if you can get outside for a few 5-minute walks throughout the day just to get this sunlight into your eyes. You want bright light. So overhead lights, desk light, ring light, whatever that looks like, light throughout the day. If you are a caffeine drinker, if you can hold off on drinking your morning caffeine 90 to 120 minutes after you wake up, research has shown that you get less of an afternoon crash. That might be partially because this gives your body time to naturally release the hormones, the neurotransmitters that we talked about, to get things going naturally. Also, if you cannot drink caffeine 8 hours before you go to bed, that will also help with your sleep. And the reason for that is because adenosine is what builds up in our body throughout the day. And that's what helps us get sleepy at night. Caffeine completely shuts off adenosine building up in our body. So when we drink that, we stop that, and then that's going to impact our evening sleep. So try at least 8 hours before you go to bed. Now, as the sun starts setting, we really want to mimic that in our environment. Because again, remember what I said, that the sunlight, depending where it is in the sky, from sunrise to midday to evening, dusk and evening, tells our brains, should we be sleepy or should we be alert? So when the sun starts setting, if you can get outside for 5 minutes, it helps our body know, hey, I need it's getting, the sun's going down. We need to start getting ready for bed. We're going to shut down cortisol and we need to increase melatonin. Okay, in your houses though, using like floor lamps or table lamps, not having bright light, shutting off screens, ideally 2 hours before bed, but at a minimum an hour before bed, because they are very activating. It tells our brain we should be awake and alert, the blue light from behind them. And having an evening practice like journaling, meditating, breath work, having a dark, cool room. These are really helpful to, again, tell the brain we need to start slowing down. So what's interesting about this is researchers have taken people that are self-described night owls and said, hey, nope, this is just the way I'm set up. I don't go to bed till like midnight or 1 o'clock. I like to sleep in. I'm a night owl. They take self-diagnosed night owls and they take them camping. They remove them from all screens and devices. And guess what happens? Their circadian rhythm completely changes. And within a night or two, they're going to bed when the sun is setting and they're waking up when the sun is rising. What's most interesting is that when you return these research subjects back to urban environments, their circadian rhythm stays intact for about 2 weeks before it becomes completely mucked up again by habits like screens, caffeine, all the things that we do that change our natural 24-hour circadian rhythm. Lastly, you want to try and go to bed around the same time and wake up around the same time 7 days a week. So sometimes we do good during the week and then the weekend is a free-for-all. And then it takes time. Again, it's this rhythm of our body that we want to not interrupt. If we do that, then it takes a second to get it back in, and you can see how that teeter-totter just, it never levels up because we're either trying to recuperate, we get finally in that place, and then we mess it up again. You want to limit naps to 20 or 30 minutes before 3 p.m., have good sleep hygiene and a friendly environment. And then if you are one that really struggles with sleep, there are a few things to look into. CBTI, it's called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. Talk to a healthcare professional. And then you can look at resources for mental health and wellness on the Kaiser Permanente website, which is helpful for like CBTI and some of those. But try this. And again, I always promise for just a few minutes, you could get a big payout at the end. So this, you're just to pick one thing, get outside and do some movement for at least 10 minutes. That is, we all have 10 minutes that we can find in our life. And then food. So what about food? Should we be eating really close to bedtime? How does food impact us? Well, there's a couple of things that could really benefit us for food. So you don't want to eat too close to bedtime because, again, you don't want to have this gut full of food that you're trying to digest. But around 150 calories is fine. We have some foods that really can benefit us in the world of sleep. And that's because some foods contain melatonin and also potassium and magnesium, which are helpful for sleep. So for melatonin, fruits like pineapples, oranges, bananas, kiwis, tart cherry juice can help with sleep because they have a high natural melatonin content. Nuts give us a double bang because they contain melatonin, potassium, and magnesium. Magnesium is good for those that are somewhat anxious, maybe have thoughts that kind of run away with them. Pistachios have the same amount of melatonin that our body naturally releases daily in just 3 pistachios. So have a couple of pistachios maybe an hour or two before you go to bed. And then lemon balm or chamomile tea. So using natural foods to help as well. So then talking about food, we can transition into how we eat and it impacts our mood. So this is really an interesting, and I think there's going to be more and more research coming out in the relationship between depression and food. And I don't think that it's really any big surprise that if we eat a highly processed diet full of sugar and processed foods like crackers and cookies and cakes and things like that, that it can impact our mood, if only because it just maybe doesn't make us feel that great. However, researchers are, doing some really fun, interesting things and finding out more and more. And I think we're really just kind of at the cusp, especially when we're looking at microbiome. Microbiome, I think, is another one of those buzzwords that we're hearing a lot more about. But when we look at depression, there's just a few things that I want to talk about. So the relationship, and one is inflammation. So the relationship between inflammation and depression was first discovered in 1887. So while there's new and innovative things that are coming out all the time, this is not a new discovery. And some researchers did some interesting work where they took 43,000 women without depression, and they followed them, their mood, and they followed their diets for 12 years. And those who ate diets that were more inflammatory, so think high in processed foods, sodas, refined grains, really high in processed meat, those were more inflammatory to the body. And those were the diets in the women that ended up having depression versus those that didn't and didn't have symptoms or a diagnosis of depression. Also, we know that antioxidants, which are high in foods like fruits and vegetables, those are anti-inflammatory. So having a diet full of unprocessed foods tends to be really anti-inflammatory. There's something called endotoxins. This is something that promotes inflammation in the body, and researchers have actually injected research participants with endotoxins who were not depressed, and within minutes to hours, they became more depressed. And they also, when the researchers gave them games that they played to win for money, when they won money, they didn't have feelings of joy like they did before that they were injected with endotoxins, which is very interesting. The other thing that we see when we eat diets that are low in processed foods, high in fruits and vegetables, grains, nuts, seeds, legumes, all of those foods are really high in fiber. And so for our microbiome, we know that our microbiome feeds off fiber. It loves fiber to make these like good, happy microbes in our stomach. And when we see that, we see lower levels of inflammation. There's a blood test you can actually take. It's called CRP, C-reactive protein, that will show levels of inflammation in your body. Those are decreased when you have diets that are higher in these plant foods. And what also is interesting is that our stomach synthesizes neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin that I've talked about. And we have this information superhighway, the vagus nerve, that goes from our gut to our brain. And that is also could show the impact of mood states when we are eating a low processed food that's high of minerals and antioxidants and fiber. And as you can see in this infographic, it all is connected this way. So, okay, how can you start today? And I put 0 minutes because this really does take 0 minutes. We could eat an apple instead of a candy bar, and that doesn't take any time out of our day. But just to include more anti-inflammatory foods. And how good are you doing right now with that? So really anti-inflammatory diets, this is not a new thing. We've heard of the Mediterranean diets, very high in unprocessed foods, very high in plant foods. So here's a little score. You can take a little picture of this or pause this to see how you're doing. But really the foods that we want to be including is having vegetables 4 or more a day, beans, legumes, 1 or more servings a day. These are incredibly healthy for us. Nuts and seeds, 1 or more servings a week, fruits, 2 or more a day, and then having more fats like avocados, nuts, and seeds, and less of saturated fats like butter. And then red and processed meats, fewer than 2 servings a week. So you can see if you get 5 points or higher that you're getting higher into the protective range. 4 or less, let's increase 1 or 2 or 3 of these foods. And then movement, exercise. So again, I don't think that this is a big surprise. Exercise is good for us. However, exercise mentally is, I would say, gosh, if people were to ask me like what my top 2 things would be, I would probably say, oh, it would be hard. I don't know. The exercise would be at the top of it. Also sleep and food. But I want to talk about why. Why is this so helpful for us? Well, first, Australia just came out with some new research that is the largest study we have to date worldwide on exercise and mood. And essentially, the Cliff Notes version of this, because we could go on and on about this, is that it didn't matter what kind of movement you did. It didn't matter if you were male or female. It didn't matter if you were 5 or 105. Across the board, any form of movement improved mental health, both depression and anxiety. There were some things that they found out specifically if you wanted to do a little bit deeper of a dive. You tend to be more on the anxious side. Participating in exercise that increased your heart rate seemed to be better. Still, any movement was good, but if you wanted better, getting your heart rate up so you were somewhat breathless was better for those that tend to be more anxious. And again, we were talking about a few slides back in community, when we don't feel well physically, we don't tend to engage in our community. We also don't tend to engage in things in our lifestyle that make us feel better. We tend to become more isolated, and that can increase our depression. And so exercise, for a number of reasons, really, if we're not doing that, it puts us at an increased risk of death. Physical inactivity is the 4th leading risk factor for premature death worldwide. It's number 5 in terms of risk factors for death in the United States, and 6 in terms of risk factors for disability, which all of these things impact our mood. If we are disabled, that's going to impact our mood. If we are getting sick, that's going to impact our mood. And this infographic on the right, I think, is really powerful, because going through medical school, I was always taught that the recommendation was 120 minutes of exercise per week. However, nobody told me what happened if you did a little bit more. So we always hear moderation is key. Well, to an extent, except for it seems to be an exercise with a ceiling limit of 500 minutes. But as you can see, that if we exercise about 20 minutes a day, we definitely get some life years gained. So, I mean, we can see that around 2.5 years, or the minimum of exercise. If you're doing high intensity exercise is 75 minutes, that's 1.8 years. However, if you exercise for a little over an hour a day, that's 4.5 years of life gained. That's a pretty big difference. Now, I know not all of us have an hour of exercise a day that we can do, but again, anything is good. And if you can do a little bit more, it seems to be better. And here's the other thing that I would like to talk about outside of formalized exercise. So again, I said that I was going to try and give things that were minimal in time as well. So if you have no minutes to exercise, the thing that I would encourage is increasing your non-exercise activity thermoneogenesis. That's the term NEAT that you see here on this slide. Essentially, that's all the movement that we get in just our daily life. So that means when you take the stairs instead of the elevator. That means when you stand up during your call, or you do some squats if you're on a phone call, instead of sitting at your desk. That means maybe every hour you get up and when you're at work and you take a 5-minute walk. Maybe that's a standing desk instead or a treadmill desk. Parking further away at the grocery store instead of watching TV at night, going outside and walking the dog or playing with the kids. There are so many ways in our daily life that we can increase our movement without having to engage in formalized exercise. Now, still, exercise is great, but here are all these other tools that you can use. Okay, this is always the most popular, is to do nothing, just to lay back and do nothing. Really, what this means is that we tend to be overscheduled, have so many things to do, or because we do have these little information supercomputers in our pocket, we never give our minds a time to just wander, or just do nothing, not even think about anything. Because what happens when you're in line waiting for something, or you're in a waiting room? We get out our phones, we look at them. There's just always are going, 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 going. Or we're watching TV, or we're listening to a podcast, or we're listening to an Audible, or whatever that looks like. So it is good for our minds to just wander. It helps increase creativity. It helps in terms of having these thoughts that I say ruminating thoughts. It means racing thoughts, having these thoughts go over and over and over again. Just booking out some time to just relax. And that can be anything from 5 minutes to 20 minutes. So give yourself some permission to do nothing at all. Okay. And then I said I was going to talk about mindfulness meditation. And this is an exercise literally that will take you 1 to 2 minutes. We have a good background now that we've been talking about fight or flight, and you'll have a good understanding of why this works. So remember how I was talking about fight or flight throughout? Well, that's essentially our parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest, and our sympathetic nervous system. So parasympathetic is oxytocin, sympathetic is cortisol. Parasympathetic is lying on the beach, sympathetic is running from the bear. There are no medications that I can prescribe that are effective, quick acting, and without side effects of getting you from a sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, into a rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system than what I'm about to teach you, which is pattern-paced breathing. So again, with the promise of just 1 to 2 minutes, you can get into that rest and digest state. And there are 2 different ways that I'm going to teach you. Both are equally fine. It's whatever your preference is. If you have a higher lung capacity, so maybe you're a runner, or you've done a lot of breath work, 4-7-8 might be better for you because you can get in and hold for deeper and exhale for longer. Both are great. I'm going to talk about 4-4-4-4. It's box breathing. This is what Navy SEALs are taught to be able to control under times of high stress. And I doubt that there are very many jobs outside of like first responders, Navy SEALs, that are under more stress. So the fact that this is what they're being taught to control, their physiological and emotional stress, I feel like, great, I'm sold. So essentially, you inhale for 4, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4, and you hold for 4. And you just do this for 1 to 2 minutes. And again, it will get you from the sympathetic state to the parasympathetic state. One way that you can see this happening is if you have some sort of smartwatch that shows your heart rate. Doing this for just 1 to 2 minutes, you will see your heart rate decrease. So all those things I talked about at the beginning, how we have this physiological response to stress, breath work slows that all down and gets that into our rest and digest. So you can do this in the car when you're in a stressful commute, when you're having a stressful conversation with somebody, when you're in a meeting that's causing stress, your kids are stressing you out, your spouse is stressing you out, all the things that we talked about. This is free and quick. And breath work is a form of mindfulness. Mindfulness has many benefits. It makes the brain more focused. It makes it easier for us to enjoy the small things in life, like getting a scoop of your favorite ice cream or the sunset or holding a loved one's hand. It also gives us more ability to deal with adverse events and stress. Being more mindful, which we do when we slow down, focus on our breath work, it's just one form of mindfulness breathing. When we do that, we're more able to participate and be present in our daily lives, which helps with our connections with our community. I am so happy that I got to be here with you guys today. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My invitation to everybody is pick 1 or 2 things that you're not doing right now and start integrating those into your life. And once you get those down, pick 1 or 2 more until you're getting as many of these strategies as you can across the board, and just see how that improves your mental health. And the side effect is you will improve your physical health as well. Thanks again, and I hope everyone has a lovely day.